is also a merge of neurotoxins. Now, sticking around persistent organic pollutions, there are characteristics of POPs. So POPs, these are the long-lasting in environment, or there's a resistance to degradation. Also, it's a lipophilic or fat-soluble, accumulate in fatty tissues of organisms. And also, it is capable of long-range transport or atmospheric dispersion. And lastly, it is bioaccumulate and biomagnify, and increase in concentration up to the food chain. So overall, the POPs, these are the materials that last in our environment longer than us, no, than we live in here. So it is the example of this are the plastics. So the plastics, these are the materials that can be degraded in a longer period of time. Good. So these are the examples of persistent organic pollutants. Now moving on, let's have the examples and effects of bisphenol A, the polychlorinated biphenyls or PCBs, the polybrominated biphenyl ethers or the PBDS, and the polyfluoroalkyl substances, and the phthalates, also the perchlorate and the atrazine. Bisphenol A. So bisphenol are the BPA. This is the polycarbonate plastics. It is the hard, clear plastics that water bottles are made of, used in plastics. It is an example of an endocrine disruptor, and it is linked to reproductive issues. Right, now, next one is the polychlorinated biphenyls, or the PCBs. It is found in insulation paints, also in immunosuppression, and it creates an effect of an endocrine issues. So polybrominated biphenyl ethers, this is the PBDS, and it is a flame retardant. It is used in fabrics and furniture foam, and it affects the thyroid and the neurodevelopmental in animals. So it doesn't just affect the people, but also towards the animals. Now, next is the polyfluoroalkyl substances, or the PFAS. It is a non-stick, stain-resistant coating, and very persistent low-dose effect. So those are the example of the PFAS. Now next is the phthalates. The phthalates are the low plastics. It is the body care. It creates an effect of the reproductive issues. So phthalates, body care, it can also include the lightening products, and also it can be the whitening products. So all of those that embodies the body care. Now next is the perchlorate. It is used in propellants, and it disrupts thyroid or hormone resistance, and it is found in water or breast milk. So that's the example of the perchlorate. Now next is the atrazine. Atrazine is a herbicide. It is also widespread in surface waters, and it is also an indication of endocrine disruption. Alright, so that's the example for the examples and effects of the mentioned toxins a while ago. Alright, so how does accumulation of these toxins happen? Now let's have the understanding the in and outs of toxic exposure. Alright, so in our understanding the in and outs of the toxic exposure, we have here the three types of it. So first is the routes of exposure. Inhalation for air, the ingestion or food and water, and the dermal contact skin, and the transplacental fetus exposure. So how are we exposed with this toxic? So according to routes of exposure, it can be in inhalation. There's an instances that the air that we breathe, there are particles of it that is a toxic, and that can be a factor. Also for the ingestion, the food or the water that we drink, there's a substance of toxic. So it can also be a factor. Now next is the dermal contact. If we have the skin-to-skin contact, that can be a factor as well in being exposed to toxic. Now next is the transplacental or the fetus exposure. So next is bioaccumulation. Accumulation of a substance in an organism faster than it can be excreted. So for example of the bioaccumulation is the DDT or the pesticides, and the methyl mercury, which accumulate in tissues over time. So methyl mercury, I will discuss that further later. Next is the biomagnification. It is an increase in concentration of toxins at higher traffic levels and can become high in top predators. So even low environmental levels, it can become in high or in top predators. So for example of this is DDT in aquatic ecosystems. For example, there's a transmission of from the algae towards the zooplankton, then the small fish, then the large fish towards the birds of prey. So the example of that, it means that there's a transmission of toxics from animals. Then towards the animal is who have the higher or in top predators that accumulated the toxic would be eaten by humans. So that's the how. So that's how we are going to go back. Huh? And that's where we will go back to the rules of exposure, where we ingest the food, which is eventually the high in top predators who accumulated the toxic. So, metal mercury. Okay, so what is metal mercury in fish? It is a top predator fish that have much higher concentrations, poses risk to humans who eat them. So this is the bioaccumulation example. So I will just actually picture since I wasn't able to give it or to edit it here in the laptop. So, in summary, the metal mercury means these are the fish that has a higher concentrations of having the toxic. Then, if it is eaten by a human being, there's a process of risk towards the people that eats it. So it is really important that we manage to have our environment clean, also away from toxic, because it is us that can be affected of it. So that is why it is important that we have or we would reduce our buying of products that is having the higher type of toxic. So for us to avoid that toxic exposure. Now let's have an activity. It is a charades, get out. So for the instructions, first is what you would do is first, for the instruction, I will divide the class into 2 groups. Next is I will disseminate papers in each row which contains toxins or toxin-related concepts, and you will choose from your group one representative to go in front and act out without speaking. Then, the toxin or its source or its effects on humans. So for example, you have the pesticide exposure. So you would act out that someone sprayed your face or anything in your body, then you cough. So that's the example of the pesticide exposure. So that's what they're going to guess. Now, number 4 is the other team was 30 seconds to guess, must guess it right. So if they guess it right, then they will have the point. Now, to reinforce learning, after the activity, I will ask you questions. Now, first question is, which toxins were easiest or hardest to identify and why? How does this game show that toxins affect people in different ways? And last is, what can we do to avoid or minimize such exposures in daily life? Wow, so I have heard your answers. And I am amazed that you have this kind of ideas and all of those, how you put importance on be aware of toxic, no? So, but I am curious on what other perspectives. So, of course, as a future educators, we are bound to be the guide of our students. We are bound to be the facilitators. And it is important that we have this kind of awareness of our products, especially us, no, as a future educator, because we can be reliable of those students, especially with the terms of what they eat, especially if they are in the school setting. No, so if they're exposed with toxic, it can be reliable for us. So it is important for us that we also promote awareness in our students of what is good to eat and what is not. So as a future educator, how can you promote awareness and prevention of toxin exposure in your classroom and community? Wow, that is a very good and long verse. Alright, well, thank you for that. So, I have heard that you are really have the knowledge about the toxic or the different types of toxins that is circulating in our environment, and you have this kind of how to promote, how you would be someone to prevent anything that is happening with toxic exposure. Then, okay, let me call on Kawa. Summarize the lesson that we have discussed. Oh, thank you, Kanwa. Alright, so, Zamora, how would you reflect in this lesson that we have? Oh, thank you, Zamora. what the way you summarize and reflect our activity or our lesson rather is you are well versed in it, and I have seen and I am happy that you have all the insights and you have this kind of ideas that you can add up with our lesson. So thank you class for the cooperation and also for listening. Now let's have a 10 item quiz. Okay, so I will give you 15 minutes to answer this 10 item quiz. Alright, time's up. Okay, so before we end our class, I will give you our assignment. So it is a toxic awareness campaign. So you will decide a mini poster, infographic, or a slogan that educates the public about one toxin. So it's up to you on what kind of toxin that you would give a toxin awareness campaign. Now your output must include the sources where you get the information, and also the health and environmental effects of that certain toxin that you have chosen. Also, what are the tips to avoid this exposure? And next is you would upload this mini poster or the infographic or slogan in our GE10 group chat. So I hope that is clear. Are there any questions? Is there any? Alright, there's none. Then let's end this class. Goodbye.